If I had to sum up this market in just a few words right now, it would be this: uncertainty, trepidation, and a real lack of confidence for both buyers and sellers. And what's important to understand is that this isn't just starting here like locally. This is coming from the larger economy, the provincial and federal economies. Government policies that are being made and global pressures are all influencing and filtering down into what we're seeing here in Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge. But here's the part most people are missing. This isn't just a slow market. It's actually two completely different markets happening at the same time. And depending on which side of that you're in, your experience could be completely opposite. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what's happening in the big picture, how it's influencing our local market here in KW, Cambridge, and Guelph, and then break down what's happening on the ground, where the challenges are, and more importantly, where the opportunities are right now. So let's start at the macro level, because this is where the tone of the entire market is being set. Over the past few weeks, we've seen significant policy approvals in housing. The federal and provincial governments have stepped up with roughly $8 billion, that's a B, billion, to reduce development charges by 50% for new construction here in Ontario. And before this, the federal government introduced a $300 million program to purchase approximately 2,200 condo units and convert them into rental housing to use up that condo inventory. Along with a couple, 2-3 weeks ago, they removed the HST on new builds for everyone, not just first-time home buyers. And you look at these three moves, they tell a very clear story. Developers are underwater. There is a backlog of inventory, primarily condos, that are not selling, and governments are stepping in to stabilize that, or maybe a better term would be to rescue them. And on the surface, this sounds like really good news. More incentives for buyers, no HST on new builds, more affordability, and ultimately more opportunity for buyers. All good news. But there's a hidden rule here that is driving a lot of what we're seeing right now. The support is going toward the type of housing that buyers really aren't actually looking to buy, because the majority of that inventory are small condo units under 700 square feet, largely concentrated in Toronto and Vancouver. Meanwhile, demand, especially in markets like ours, is strongest for detached homes and townhomes that offer space, long-term functionality. Here in Guelph, 44% of homes sold during March were detached homes, while condos represented 17% of sales. So that tells you where demand lies. Even with 42% of Guelph condos sitting empty, which means more negotiating power for buyers, detached outsold condos. And at the same time, provincial permits for single family homes are sitting at levels we haven't actually seen since the 1980s. We have a real mismatch. We are supporting one type of supply while underbuilding the type of housing people actually want. And when that happens, it creates a lot of friction in the market. Now, layer on top of all of that, everything people are feeling right now: concerns about inflation, food prices are still high, global instability, and the overall economic outlook. What that creates is hesitation. Buyers hesitate, sellers hesitate, and confidence, which is what really drives the real estate market, starts to weaken. So think about that. During COVID, when there was lots of uncertainty and we were told to stay home, and people actually had more confidence then than they do right now. How does this big picture stuff filter down locally in March across Guelph, Cambridge, and KW? When looking at the four cities, sales activity was mixed depending on the city. Guelph and Cambridge both saw total home sales decline for March, roughly 13 and 14%, while Kitchener and Waterloo actually saw sales increase between 10 and 16%. So even within our local market and region, we're not seeing a consistent story. We're seeing fragmentation. And when it comes to pricing, this is where things become a little more aligned. Guelph is sitting at $770,000 average sale price when you factor in all property types, and that's relatively flat from March of last year. It's about 1% up. Cambridge is down about 5% to $722,000, again factoring all property types. Waterloo is approximately 3% up to $760,000, and Kitchener is $690,000, making it the most affordable right now. While activity varies, pricing is either holding or softening across the board. Buyers are still active, but they're far more selective. They're not rushing in. They're not stretching beyond what really feels comfortable. Interest rates are still relatively low, 4%, 4.5% range. And I know it's not COVID rates, but in 2023, when they spiked to 6%, it's way better than that. Now, when we zoom out and look at the trend, this is where the market becomes even more clear. This is not a steady market. It is a reactive one. We are seeing sharp peaks and valleys in sales activity, sometimes swings of up to 50% from one month to the next. And that is significant. And it tells us that timing matters more than ever. Even though I say you can't time the market, you can see from this data that there are more likely times to sell to maximize sales price. And from a buyer's perspective, when you're more likely to pay the most right now. And looking back, like the last 2 years, we've consistently seen activity peak in May and June, and then in September. So these are the strongest windows in the market. And on the flip side, the slowest periods tend to happen in December and January. Particularly this January was especially slow, likely influenced both the weather and already low confidence levels. The hidden rule here is that this market rewards timing and strategy more than ever before. It's no longer enough to simply list a home and wait. It's also no longer about whether we are in a buyer's market or a seller's market. What I think matters most is whether your specific property aligns with what buyers want at the moment they are active. And here's the dilemma that both buyers and sellers are navigating right now. On one hand, you have government incentives supporting new builds. On the other hand, those new builds are largely condos, often under 800, 700 square feet. But when we look at actual demand, in Guelph alone, approximately 44% of sales are detached homes in March. And that is what people are actually actively looking for. We have a disconnect again. Incentives are pushing one direction while demand is pulling in another direction. And that creates confusion. Buyers are questioning whether they should take advantage of incentives or wait for something that truly fits their needs. And sellers are questioning whether this is the right time to move or whether they should wait for more certainty and perhaps higher prices. Let's talk about what most people are missing, because this is where the real opportunity is. There is a very clear split in the market right now. And in condo market, there's an oversupply. In Guelph alone, approximately 42% of condos are currently vacant. That means many owners are carrying costs every single month, including condo fees, property taxes, and some utilities. And that creates motivation. So if you're a buyer looking at condos, this is where you have leverage. You have more choice, more negotiation power, and more flexibility on price and conditions. And on the other side of the market, detached homes tell a very different story. Across the region, months of inventory for detached homes is sitting under 3 months. And typically in a market like that, you would expect to see a number of multiple offer situations. And you'd also expect a strong competition and bidding activity. But that's not what we're actually seeing to the extent that most people would expect. Detached homes are still selling, but only if they are positioned properly. And that means priced correctly and presented well and aligned with what today's buyers expect. Because buyers today are not behaving the way they did just even a few years ago. And this brings us right back to how I started this entire video. Buyers right now are feeling uncertainty, trepidation, and lack of confidence. And that is the exact opposite of what we saw during COVID. During COVID, buyers were driven by FOMO. There was a strong sense that if you didn't buy now, you might be priced out or miss your opportunity entirely. And there was a clear herd mentality in the market at that time, even if people didn't consciously recognize it. Today, that has completely shifted. Buyers are more cautious. They're taking their time. They're questioning value and making more deliberate decisions. So even though the fundamentals for detached homes suggest there should be more competition, buyer psychology is actually overriding all of that. My positioning matters more than ever. So when you hear that this market is uncertain, that is true. But what is really happening underneath, I believe, is that there's a shift in behavior, from urgency to caution, from fear of missing out to fear of getting it wrong. And once you understand that, you start to see the market entirely differently.